Hey Optimancers, Treantmonk here, and welcome to the next part of my Guide to Wizards. This week we are going to be doing the Conjurer. Now with this series, it has been my intent that all 10 of these builds would be significantly different from each other. These aren't always going to be the first choice I would do for these subclasses, but what I want to do is create 10 different builds that do 10 different things in 10 different ways, but will all still be effective. Now, what I want to do with this build was, first off, I'm doing one of the races that doesn't get a bonus to intelligence. Now, because it doesn't get a bonus to intelligence, that means one of two things is going to happen. Either, number one, we're going to raise our intelligence and it's going to constantly track one behind all of the wizards until we get to 20. And that's a decent strategy, and I'm going to be doing that with another one of these builds. But with this build, what I want to do is take it on in a different way. So instead of raising our intelligence behind every other class, what I want to do with this build is see what we can do if we don't raise our intelligence at all, and make a wizard that is less reliant on intelligence than any of the other wizard builds that I will be doing in this series. So with this build, the challenge will be to look for spells that maybe don't provide saving throws, don't require to hit rolls, and then use those spells instead so that we suffer less from having the lower intelligence. Now, the second thing that happens is we do get less preparations than other wizards, so we also have to look at our preparations a little bit differently. How are we going to fit these spells with less preparations onto this wizard and still be effective? As always, with this build, I will be splitting it into 3 different parts. The first part is going to cover levels 1 through 4. The second part will cover levels 5 through 10. And then the third part will cover from levels 11 through 20. So when you want to check out those other videos, you're going to find links for them. All 3 videos will have links to the other videos in the description as well. I'll pin a comment in the comment section that has the links as well. So today I bring you the Conjurer, a wizard that does not raise its intelligence and who concentrates on spells that don't require intelligence. So let's get started. So we have our character right here, the Master of Creation, I'm going to call it, because that's what conjuration spells do. And we're going to focus more on conjuration spells with this character than we normally would with other wizards. Now, some subclasses don't make huge distinctions between the type of spell you cast, but conjurers actually do get a lot of bonuses with conjuration spells. But reaching level 10, a conjurer will get significant bonuses on any conjuration spell that is going to require concentration, including the lower level ones they took up to then. So we want to prepare for that by giving a little bit of bias towards conjuration spells. So I've removed all the homebrew stuff and all the unusual stuff. So we're going to look at the race now. So the Goblin race, again, it's not a typical race for wizards, but I do think it can be a very good race for wizards, certainly with the build we're going to do today. So the Goblin, first off, in terms of ability score bonuses, we're not getting an intelligence bonus, but if we're not going to get an intelligence bonus, what I want is a dexterity bonus and a constitution bonus, and that's what we get here. We get a +2 dexterity bonus, +1 constitution bonus. Then we get dark vision. Now, dark vision's pretty common. Lots of races get it, but it's still useful. And then we get 2 abilities that are unique to goblins. So let's talk about those in a little more detail. The first one we get, and I think by far the more minor of the 2, is Fury of the Small. When you damage a creature with an attack or a spell, and the creature's size is larger than yours, you can cause the attack or spell to deal extra damage to the creature. The extra damage equals your level. Once you use this trait, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So basically, one time we do damage, every rest, we can increase it by our level. So a first level character, that's 1 point of damage every rest. It's pretty minor stuff, but it's still something we definitely can make use of it. This is the one that really draws me to the Goblin race, specifically with this build. Nimble Escape. You can take the disengage or the hide action as a bonus action on each of your turns. This character is going to get a big bonus out of being able to do the hide action as a bonus action on their turns. So we're going to choose our class of Wizard, And what we want to do here is we want to definitely get the perception and stealth skills. Now there's lots of different ways we can do that. Technically speaking, any background can give you the perception and stealth skills because the player's handbook allows you to change the skills that your background provides. In terms of this character, I'm going to do it just a classic way. We're going to go ahead and do what the player's handbook suggests. So we're going to start with our 2 wizard skills. We're going to take 2 most stereotypical skills for wizards, Arcana and History. Now, for pretty much any wizard, these are pretty standard skills to take. Then we're going to go into our description and we're going to take the background that the player's handbook suggests, which is Sage. Sage is going to give us 2 skill proficiencies. Normally those would be Arcana and History, but because we already have those skills, we select 2 different skills, and now we can take our Perception and Stealth. Now this character can live without perception, but stealth is absolutely vital. Now we're going to get 2 languages, and that's part of the reason I like the Sage background here, is because the languages we want to select, this is a character that uses conjuration spells, and summoning spells are conjuration spells. So when we're summoning creatures, we can command them as part of the spell, but if we want to communicate with those creatures, we would want to be able to speak their languages. So we're going to have definitely the Summon Elemental spell. So let's take Primordial, and then we'll probably have like the Summon Greater Demon spell. So let's go ahead and take Abyssal. Now, we might also want Infernal with this if we are going to be summoning devils, but I would definitely focus on languages that allow us to interact with summons. So normally when we pick languages with these characters, I say take whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to say take whatever you want to summon. So with this character, I'm going to use a point buy, but I'm going to tell you what I would do with a standard array if that's what we were going to have. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get my dexterity and my constitution scores both to 16. That's pretty rare for a first level wizard. Usually we can't afford to do that. But because we're playing a character that is going to have a bonus to both those scores, we can here, so we absolutely want to do that. So we're going to take a 14 in dexterity and a 15 in constitution, and then once we add in our racial bonuses, they're both 16. Now, if I was going to do a standard array, exactly the same. Constitution 15, dexterity 14. Then we get to our intelligence. With the point buy, I'm going to take a 14. If I had a standard array, I'd be forced with a 13. So what difference does that make to the character? Well, number 1, when we do an Arcana roll or a History roll, we would have 1 less bonus. Number 2, when it comes to spell preparations, we're going to have 1 less. And that's it. None of the spells with this character are going to care that our intelligence is lower. So it's not a huge deal, but it does make your spell preparations a little more tight. With the point buy, we have a remaining 4 points, and I'm going to put them under Wisdom, and that's going to boost both our saving throws for Wisdom, which are going to be more common than Charisma or Strength saving throws, and it helps our Perception skill. Moving into equipment, we're going to take standard equipment here. So I'm going to take a dagger, and I'm going to take a component pouch. You could take an arcane focus, that would be fine. And then we can take an explorer's pack over a scholar's pack, because the explorer's pack contains some equipment that comes up in adventuring a lot. And when you have a scholar's pack, you're going to find that you don't have some of the stuff that you need, like a decent light source or rope, those kinds of things. Now I'm going to add these in, but now I need to talk about an additional piece of equipment that you want to have. So if you have no help from any party members, you want to use that starting 10 gold pieces and buy yourself a sling and some bullets. Super cheap to do. But ideally, sometimes other characters will get a simple weapon they didn't need, and then what we would ask them to do is maybe pick up a light crossbow and give it to us, because a light crossbow is exactly what this character wants to have. Like I said, if you have no other option, a sling will do until you can afford a light crossbow, but pick one up as soon as possible. So I'm going to put in a light crossbow right now. So wizards are proficient in both slings and light crossbows, so whichever you have, you're already proficient in it. So now into our spells, we're going to do our cantrips first. So the first cantrip I usually take, and I'm certainly going to take it here, is Minor Illusion. Now I'm going to select 2 additional cantrips. This is a character that is going to be stealthy a fair amount of the time, because we have, of course, our Nimble Escape that allows us to use stealth as a bonus action. We're also proficient in stealth, and we have a good dexterity. So I figure one thing that might be useful when we're being stealthy is a way to communicate with other characters without making a lot of noise. Message is a way to do that. Another thing that might be handy is the ability to move stuff around without moving out of obscurement. And a Mage Hand is a good way to do that. So those are going to be the 3 cantrips I start with. You notice I didn't start with an attack cantrip, and I won't have an attack cantrip with this character. We are going to be using our light crossbow for attacks in combat, and that is going to deliver more damage than we're going to be doing with any cantrip until we reach level 5. Once we reach level 5, of course, we're not doing as many attacks. We're not using cantrips as much in combat. So that's not a huge loss for this character. So we're going to do more damage at lower levels than a wizard that relies on cantrips. And then at higher levels, when we would be relying on those kinds of attacks less, then we won't be as good as somebody who uses a cantrip, but it's not a big deal. Now, going into our first level spells, what we definitely want to remember is because we have a lower intelligence, we have less preparations. So usually we're preparing 4 spells at first level, but with this character we will only be preparing 3. So what I want to do here is I definitely want to add an additional ritual, because we're going to pick 6 spells here. So let's pick 3 rituals and then 3 spells we will be preparing. Find Familiar, because I think it's the best ritual in the game. I've talked about that many times. Detect Magic, I find, is just a really useful ritual. It comes up a lot. And then I'm going to take Unseen Servant, largely for the same reason I take Mage Hand. But Unseen Servant provides us some things that Mage Hand doesn't. Number 1, it lasts for an hour. So we can do it often before we start adventuring, and then we don't need to use that action to cast the Mage Hand. We'll just have the Unseen Servant there. The second thing is it can do things at a 60-foot range. So we can do things like open up books that might have explosive ruins that have a 30-foot radius. Now, if we use a Mage Hand to open that book, we're in that radius. But if we use an Unseen Servant, we can be out of that radius. And open doors from range and that kind of thing. Now, there's some redundancy with Unseen Servant and Mage Hand, but Mage Hand, again, is a 1-action casting. This one is going to require us ritual casting. So the points in time when we would be using these spells are definitely different. Now we're going to do 3 spells that we are going to prepare. I usually take Shield as my first option, and I definitely will here. Now, I often take Mage Armor at this point. I'm going to hold off on Mage Armor. Usually, I would suggest that first level wizards don't cast Mage Armor anyways. If you look at my low level wizard tactics video, I suggest that first level wizards don't worry about casting Mage Armor because you don't have the spell slots. So I'm not even going to bother preparing it or even taking it with this wizard at first level. I'll definitely take it next level. But I don't want to ignore defense with this character. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the Fog Cloud spell. Now, I think the Fog Cloud spell works especially well with this character. Now, I did a whole video on the Fog Cloud spell, and I think if you don't know how it works mechanically, you could really take advantage of that. So I'm going to link it up above, and I highly recommend you check it out if you're going to make this build, because it is highly reliant on the mechanics of Fog Cloud that a lot of people aren't aware of. But just in very quick terms, the Fog Cloud spell is a 1-action casting. It's going to use our concentration. We're not concentrating on anything else at this point, so that's not a problem. It lasts up to an hour, but we can't move it around. Now, we create a 20-foot radius sphere of fog, so that's 64 square, so it's reasonably big. And in that area, we create heavy obscurement. When you have heavy obscurement, you can use the hide action. Our Goblin can use the hide action as a bonus action. So what that means is, defensively, this is perfect for our character. This is going to be a better defensive spell for us than Mage Armor plus Shield is for most wizards. Because what we can do is we can use 1 action to cast the Fog Cloud. Then we can use a bonus action to hide. And then we can use our movement. And once we do that, then assuming our stealth check is higher than the passive perception of the enemies, and usually passive perception is either 10 or not too much over 10, because most creatures aren't actually proficient in perception, they just are using their wisdom modifier on a 10. So 10 is a common DC, 11s and 12s come up reasonably often as well. It's usually not much higher than that, and we have a +5 on our roll, so chances are pretty good that we're going to make that roll. Once we do that, we're hidden. Those creatures cannot attack us because they don't know where we are. Then we can move into whatever position we want. We can attack with our light crossbow, which will reveal us, and then we can use our bonus action to hide again and move again. So what you end up with is a character that is completely undetectable by the enemy, and it can attack without disadvantage. Lovely. But I also want a big gun spell for this character. And the best big gun spell at first level is Sleep. So Sleep, we're going to be rolling 5d8 number of hit points on creatures. They're going to fall asleep. This does not rely on our intelligence in any way. So when we talk about first level wizards, I usually talk about how they're not super tough. I mean, utility wise, first level wizards of course have rituals that can be very useful, but in combat there's only a limited number of things they can do. This character is actually a lot more useful in combat than we would expect from a first level wizard. Our light crossbow is actually doing reasonably good damage, has a good chance to hit, and then we can add Fury of the Small if we want to do an extra point of damage. That's not a big deal, but we should use it every short rest regardless. We have a +3 initiative, that's pretty good, and then we can use that Fog Cloud spell, and then we can be completely safe in combat. We can also use the Sleep spell as a big gun spell to take out a reasonable amount of enemies. So there's actually a lot this character can do for a first level character, and then the 9 hit points is better than we would expect most wizards to have at this level. Usually a 14 constitution ends up being the norm, so we're going to have higher hit points and a higher constitution saving throw. Now, even if we don't use the Fog Cloud spell, we can still do that hide as a bonus action in any time when we have obscurement or cover. So we can still get use out of that ability even when we don't cast the Fog Cloud spell. It's just that the Fog Cloud spell creates this situation where we can use it automatically. So I really like this character at level 1. Let's take it to level 2. Now, a Conjurer at level 2 gets an ability that is a little less flashy than some other subclasses get. When it comes to Conjuration, the level 6 ability is fantastic, and the level 10 ability is amazing. The level 2 ability, it's largely going to depend on your DM interpretation. It might just be a light utility thing for you, or it might be reasonably useful. It certainly doesn't compare with Hypnotic Gaze or Portent or anything like that. So starting at second level, when we select this school, you can use your action to conjure up an inanimate object in your hand or on the ground in an unoccupied space that you can see within 10 feet of you. This object is no larger than 3 feet on a side and can weigh no more than 10 pounds. And its form must be of a non-magical object that you have seen. The object is visibly magical, radiating dim light out to 5 feet. The object disappears after 1 hour when you use this feature again, or if it deals or takes any damage. So the obvious uses here are: you don't have a lantern, you need a lantern, you create a lantern. You don't have a rope, you need a rope, you create a coil of rope. You don't have lockpicks, you need lockpicks, you create some lockpicks. So just kind of basic utility stuff. Now, this ability also is not limited. We can do it over and over and over again. The only limitation is we can only have one created item at a time. Now, what about in combat? Well, with a goblin in combat, what we could do is we could create a barrel, and then we could use our bonus action to hide behind the barrel. Because we are a goblin, we can make use of that. And unlike Minor Illusion, Minor Conjuration is going to create an object that is solid. So we are not talking about obscurement anymore. We are now talking about total cover. Now, the advantage of total cover is now we cannot be targeted with an attack. So if you use a minor illusion and you hide behind it, if an enemy discovers where you are, they can still technically attack you. They just have disadvantage because they can't see you, but you can still be attacked. But if you have a real barrel and you're behind it, you cannot be targeted with an attack. Now, they can hit the barrel and the barrel immediately disappears. And that would require one of their attacks. But that's one attack that can't be on you. So in combat, there are some very minor uses here. So it's not useless in combat. The main thing is, when I talk about DM interpretation, I would talk about things like spell components. Can we create a diamond with this that a cleric could use for a raise dead spell? We don't know. It really depends on the DM interpretation. A DM may not allow it, or they may allow it. If they allow it, this becomes a lot more powerful. Potentially, they might even allow you to do things like create alchemical items. They might allow you to do things like create poisons. If they do, this is actually a very powerful ability. If they don't, It's still reasonably useful as a utility, and there are some minor applications in combat. It's not as flashy as some subclasses have. It's certainly appropriate for a conjuration wizard. So now we are going to pick 2 additional first level spells. We're only going to be able to prepare one of them, but I'm going to take 2 spells that are going to require preparation because I'll want one probably for later. So I'm going to learn absorb elements, but I'm not going to worry about preparing absorb elements. It doesn't come up a lot at low levels. Something I like to have on a wizard just in case. But that is the cost of having the lower intelligence. In this case, we're not going to have absorb elements prepared. I don't think it's the end of the world. And then we are going to take Mage Armor at this point. We definitely want Mage Armor on any full wizard. So when we do a 20 level Conjurer with a Goblin, we're not going to have any armor proficiency at any point unless we were to expend feats on it, and it's not worth it. Much easier to just use a first level spell. You get Mage Armor, add 3 to your armor class. Nothing wrong with that. So what we have prepared at second level, we're going to have our Fog Cloud, very effective defensive spell for us, Mage Armor, and at second level, I'd probably use a spell slot on Mage Armor. We're going to have 3 first level spells. We can even get a 4th one with Arcane Recovery. So I do think Mage Armor is worth the investment here. Takes our armor class from a 13 to a 16. Then we're going to prepare the shield spell just in case. I think we might need the shield spell less with this character. We have a good base armor class, and Fog Cloud is often going to prevent attacks from happening against us in the first place. And then Sleep is still our big gun spell. But in combat, generally, when we're not using our big gun spell, we are relying on our light crossbow for attacks. And +5 to hit, d8 +3. It's not going to be as good as a fighter who's specializing in archery, for example, because they're going to have the archery combat style. But overall, this is reasonably good damage for that level. And of course, then on top of it, we have the ability to do things like the sleep spell as our big gun spell. So once in a while, we'll use that big gun to have a more significant impact on a combat. So third level, all that's really affected is we're going to get the ability to cast second level spells. So we're going to go ahead and select 2 second level spells. Now we can only have 1 additional preparation. So as I said, I want to look at conjuration spells here. The conjuration spell I'm going to take here is Cloud of Daggers. Now Cloud of Daggers, what it does is it creates a choke point. And it's really useful if we can either trap enemies or put it in like a 5-foot hallway. It is a 60-foot range concentration spell, lasts up to a minute. You fill the air with spinning daggers in a cube 5 feet on each side, so it's 1 square, centered on a point you choose within range. A creature takes 44 slashing damage when it enters the spell's area for the first time on a turn or starts its turn there. So if we put it in, say, a 5-foot hallway, any creature that wants to come through it is going to have to take that damage. Also, if we can trap a character, so if we have, say, a barbarian in the party and they rage and then they grapple somebody, then we could do a Cloud of Daggers on their square, and they're going to take that damage automatically every round. There is no save against this effect, so it does not rely on our intelligence at all, and it's a reasonably decent effect. Now we need to plan to use it. We need to have that narrow hallway, we need to have somebody who grapples, something like that. This is something we want to talk about with our other party members, because tactically, to use this effectively, we want to have somebody either take the damage more than once or multiple enemies take the damage. So choke point, grappling, or reducing movement speed to 0. The other spell I want to take at this level is for maneuverability, and that will be Misty Step. Again, another conjuration spell, and very useful for this character. I've heard people say that because a Conjurer gets an ability to do a similar teleport with their level 6 ability, it can replace Misty Step. I think you definitely want both of them. And I'll talk about that when that next ability comes in effect. So we are only going to get 1 more preparation slot at this level, and we want to have both our Cloud of Daggers and our Misty Step prepared. So at this point, I'm going to unprepare Sleep. Again, 3rd level is usually that point where you might keep Sleep, but it's not necessary to keep. So when we're talking about a character that's tight on preparation slots, it's definitely the one I'd get rid of here. And then I can prepare both Cloud of Daggers and Misty Step. So when we look at our third level character, we're still largely relying on a crossbow for attacks, but now we have that cloud of daggers for 4d4. We would expect that to do about 10 points in a round. That's pretty similar to what you would get from, say, a magic missile spell, except we can do damage repeatedly. So again, if we can get a 5-foot area that enemies have to come through, and we can hit more than one of them, then that's going to do 20, 30, 40 points of damage. If we can get a enemy that's stuck in a square, either through a grapple or any other effect that reduces their movement speed to 0, then we can use that again effectively and do 20, 30, 40 points of damage with that ability. So just casting it on an enemy that is just going to move out of that area, you might as well have just cast a magic missile and used the lower level slot. In order to use Cloud of Daggers effectively, you should plan on a way to do the damage at least twice. And defensively, we're in reasonably good shape because we're going to have a 16 base armor class with our mage armor, and we can use a shield spell. So we are now a 4th level wizard, and I'm going to take an ability score improvement. Not going to increase my intelligence. Now there are a few different options here that I think are good. Number 1, we could increase our dexterity. I think that's a reasonable investment here. It improves our stealth ability, it improves our initiative, and it improves our armor class, and it's going to improve both our to hit and our damage with our light crossbow, which we're still using a lot at this point. The other thing we could do is we could take the alert feat. The alert feat to give us that +5 to initiative, plus our regular initiative modifier means we would be looking at a +8 initiative modifier. Can't be surprised. If we're attacked from hidden, they don't get advantage. So that's also a good choice. I just wanted to add a little point here that was brought up to me after I did my fog cloud video that I hadn't considered when I made this video. So I wanted to jump in and mention that also with the alert feat, because when you are attacked by a creature that is hidden from you, it doesn't get advantage anymore. If we combine that with a fog cloud, then they would lose their advantage from attacking us, being hidden from us, but they would keep their disadvantage from not being able to see us. So what it would do is, in a fog cloud, when attacks are normally straight up, creatures would be attacking with disadvantage. So it actually works well with fog cloud. Something I hadn't considered when I did this video, and I don't know whether that would have made me choose alert at this point, but I would have considered it, I think, a little more closely. Now, with this build, I do take alert, and once I do, it's just something to take note of. Now, with the fog cloud, we are attempting to hide and not be attacked at all. So in that case, it doesn't really make a difference, but in cases where creatures can know where we are, then when they attack, they would have disadvantage. So that's another way that alert could be really useful for this build. So this was mentioned to me by a couple different people, but the first one to mention it to me was Bren Singer. So I wanted to thank you, Bren Singer, for mentioning how alert can work well with a fog cloud. We could also take the lucky feat, because the lucky feat, number 1, if we are doing a concentration save, we can use it to get another shot. Certainly any failed saving throw, it's useful to be able to do another roll for that. If we're using Fog Cloud in combination with Stealth, and we roll terrible on a Stealth roll, then we could use Lucky to get another roll on that. So that would be a good choice too. But the one I'm actually going to take is Skulker. Now, when I did my feat video, I suggested that Skulker wasn't a very good feat, and then a lot of people told me about something I was missing. So, Dim Light doesn't impose disadvantage on your Wisdom Perception checks relying on sight. Normally that's the case with Dark Vision. If you're in darkness and you're using Dark Vision, it's treated as Dim Light, and that would normally provide you disadvantage on all perception checks. If you have Skulker, that doesn't happen anymore. When you are hidden from a creature and you miss it with a ranged weapon attack, making the attack doesn't reveal your position. That's really useful for this character because, again, we are using Fog Cloud and we're using Stealth in combination with that, and it prevents us from needing to re-roll our Stealth if we happen to miss on an attack. But the real reason we want Skulker is you can try to hide when you are lightly obscured from the creature from which you're hiding. And this is the one that people talked to me about after I did that video, because I had missed that if you are using Dark Vision to see, then everything is lightly obscured. That means that any creature relying on Dark Vision, this character can now do a stealth check against. Whether they have cover or not, whether they have additional obscurement or not, just that dim light condition is enough. And if we're going against somebody who doesn't have dark vision, then any case of dim light, again, is light obscurement. And then there's other things that can cause light obscurement as well. Things like light foliage or patchy fog, that kind of thing. We can still use our stealth checks in those situations. So what we've done is we've vastly increased the number of times we can use stealth without using fog cloud. And we definitely, as we move up in levels, will want to use fog cloud less because it does require concentration and it is blocking our own line of sight. And if we can avoid those two things, then number one, we can get advantage on our attack rolls. And number two, we're not requiring that casting of that spell. And situations where we are fighting creatures that are using dark vision are pretty common, and then we can often use that to be able to do the hide action without having to worry about having cover or anything like that. Now, important to note that if you have dim light, then somebody with dark vision is seeing that as bright light. So if we're talking about positioning of our character, ideally we want to be out of the dim light if we're hiding against creatures that might have dark vision. Now, if it's a bunch of humans and it's dim light, you can hide anywhere. So we're going to get another cantrip at this level, and I'm going to take the Mending cantrip. I've mentioned before that you could technically use Mending if you lose crossbow bolts and you want to reclaim them. You could use Mending as a way of repairing broken crossbow bolts. The Mending has lots of other uses as well, so I think it's a reasonable choice for this character. Now we're going to get 2 additional spell selections. You might notice that our spell preparations are really tight here because, again, we're not increasing our intelligence, and so those preparations don't increase at the same rate as somebody who is. So what I want to do here is I want to take one spell that's going to require preparation and one spell that is not. So for the one that's not, what I want to do is take a ritual that I normally don't take, and that's Magic Mouth. I think it's an okay ritual, and I've heard ways that people can use this in very complex ways to be an extremely effective ritual. But I don't want to get into that because that would be like an entire video series, and it's almost beyond my own comprehension. But if you are a coder, you might be able to figure it out on your own. So Magic Mouth, 11-minute casting time. Of course, we're casting as a ritual, so we're spending a lot of time casting this spell. We already know that, no big deal. 30-foot range. This spell lasts until it's dispelled, so it has an indefinite duration. You implant a message within an object in range. A message is uttered when a trigger condition is met. Choose an object that you can see and isn't being worn or carried by another creature. Then speak the message, which must be 25 words or less. That's actually quite a few words, though can be delivered over as long as 10 minutes. Finally, determine the circumstances that will trigger the spell to deliver your message. When that circumstance occurs, a magical mouth appears on the object and recites the message in your voice and at the same volume you spoke. If the object you chose has a mouth or something that looks like a mouth, for example, the mouth of a statue, the magical mouth appears there so that the words appear to come from the object's mouth. That's just flavor. When you cast a spell, you can have the spell end after it delivers its message, or it can remain and repeat its message whenever the trigger occurs. So technically, this can be a permanent effect. The triggering circumstances can be general or detailed as you like, though it must be based on a visual or audible conditions that occur within 30 feet of the object. For example, you could instruct the mouth to speak whenever a creature moves within 30 feet of the object, or whenever a silver bell rings within 30 feet of it. So what this does is it's basically an illusion, but it's an audible illusion, and then we can basically have it permanent, and we can choose the trigger for it. There's not a lot of obvious combat implications for this, but what I would think is that if the magic mouth is screaming stuff and you have it set up beforehand, then you could potentially be doing things like casting spells from hidden without it revealing you, because who's going to hear that over the screaming of a magic mouth? But that's going to require a little bit of DM interpretation. With illusions, there's always a lot of DM interpretation, but I do think Magic Mouth has a number of utility uses as well. Certainly, I'd be casting Magic Mouth on my spellbook, and if anyone but me opens that spellbook, then it would be shouting out an alarm, for example. So when it comes to second level spells at this point, there's 2 spells that kind of spoke to me that I considered, and I want to talk about both of them before I'm going to tell you which one I'm going to take. The first one I consider is invisibility, because as a goblin, we can cast invisibility, then use our bonus action to do stealth on the same round, and then move, and then it gives us very similar to what the fog cloud gives us, but without the giveaway of a fog cloud. There's some downsides to fog cloud. Number one, if you want to sneak through an area and you don't want anyone to be alerted, putting a big magical fog isn't a good way to do it. The second thing is we probably have other party members that have advantage from various things like reckless attack. And then by doing a fog cloud, we prevent them from being able to do that because all attacks in a fog cloud are not going to have advantage or disadvantage. So invisibility has some nice utility use, and it gives us another defensive option in combat that doesn't affect other party members as much as a fog cloud does. Downside is that, of course, whenever you cast a spell or do an attack roll, when you're invisible, you're automatically revealed. And that's a bit of a problem because there's not a lot of things we can do other than cast a spell or do an attack. The second thing is it uses our concentration, so we can't even use it while we're concentrating on another effect. So I think there's a bit of redundancy with invisibility, not complete redundancy, but a bit of redundancy and some limitations that I don't think make it perfect here. Though I think it's a reasonable selection, but it's going to be primarily utility for us. The one I think has a better combat application, and the one I'm going to take, is Levitate. So what Levitate does is, number one, if we are in danger and we don't want to use the fog cloud for the reasons I mentioned, we can levitate ourselves up out of the combat, and then we can just pepper down crossbow bolts. The other option is we can use Levitate on another creature, so we could use it on an ally that needs the same kind of assistance. And we could do that, and then we can use our bonus action to hide ourselves. So we might take both of us out of the combat, and then enemies really become restricted on who they can attack. Often then they're really stuck attacking the characters that have that great armor class and tons of hit points. Now, technically speaking, we can also cast it on an enemy. Probably not something I would be doing with this character. Our intelligence isn't quite as high, and Levitate already focuses on the worst saving throw that you can hit, Constitution. So I would use it on Levitate on myself or Levitate on an ally. So our spell preparations here are pretty easy because we don't need to prepare Magic Mouth, so we're just going to prepare Levitate. Of course, we have a lot more spells at this level, so we can be casting spells far more freely, but we're still going to be using our crossbow in combat. At level 4, we're not going to see a big difference between what we can do with a crossbow and somebody who's actually good with a crossbow can do, and we're still doing more damage with a crossbow than another wizard would do with a cantrip. In terms of spells, we have 3 second level spells, both for preparations and for slots. And the 3 spells we have ready to go are Misty Step. We know the uses of Misty Step. Gets you out of melee, gets you into areas you normally couldn't get to. It's a short range teleport, bonus action. And then we have Levitate that can take us out of a combat, take an ally out of a combat. That's often what we would do, and then we could combine it with our own hide, make it more difficult for enemies to attack the more vulnerable members of our party. And then there's Cloud of Daggers. Again, we want to be using that either on choke points or on enemies that we've had their speed reduced to 0. And our first level spells are basically all defensive. We've got our Mage Armor, which we will cast at the beginning of the day to get a decent armor class. Shield in case we get hit, then we can have a really good armor class. And then Fog Cloud that, as I said, is useful with our bonus action hide ability. So that's a Goblin Conjurer up to level 4. I do think defensively it's actually stronger than most wizards because we have that bonus action hide and the way we can combine that with spells and feats. Now, offensively, there's potentially less of a punch. We're relying on things like Cloud of Daggers, which is a little bit circumstantial. And we have Sleep, but again, it's not going to level well, so it's good for our first couple levels, and then maybe not so much after that. So we're going to be relying on that light crossbow a little bit more than most wizards would be relying on a weapon. So in our next part, we're going to be talking about taking this character from level 5 through level 10. I'm going to have links for that in the video description, as well as in the comments down below. And as always, I will include a link to the final 20th level build for this character in the video description. So I will see you in our next part.